What's going on, everybody? John out here with you. It's been a while since we did a video game review, and it's been honestly 4 years since Final Fantasy VII Part 1 for Final Fantasy VII Remake. So it's finally time for me to get back to it. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth video review. Technically, this is Part 2, but I don't want to confuse anybody, so I didn't label that in the title. So we had Remake 4 years ago on PS4 and PC. Now we got Rebirth on PS5. Again, this is a timed exclusive. It will be coming on PC. As I understand, Xbox players don't have access to anything yet, so that's really unfortunate, but at some point this will be coming to PC once it's done. So this is where I stand now. So I told you in part 1, again, I prepped myself from watching my old video from part 1 and then watching the 4 8-bit productions for Death Unites Us, who's been a Final Fantasy aficionado for a long time. Again, I mentioned in my first video, 1997, when this game came out initially, I was 10 years old. Death would have been 4 years old. He does this for a living on YouTube, makes tutorials, all kinds of stuff on FF7, Wrong Warp, all that. He's got over 200 hours in the Platinum. It took me about 120 hours to play this game just through normally, so I'm imagining another 80 hours through hard mode and everything else, and you'd be done. That's kind of how I left it on the part 1 side. That's how I'm going to leave it now, going through a full playthrough and giving you results and my thoughts on it. So where do I stand? So in this game, I have a hard time differentiating one thing, exactly how I feel, and hopefully in the 17 minutes just above I'll be able to tell you all of that. And the reason why I say that is this. Final Fantasy VII Part 1 Remake on PS4 and PC about 4 years ago was a very linear game. We know the initial release was 3 discs. This game is 2 discs on the PS5 nonetheless. You got an install disc and then the play disc. It's a very long game. Remake clocked in about 60 hours. Rebirth clocks in about 120. It does come into a situation where you got to tell yourself this. What are the parts that you like about Remake and Rebirth? What makes one better than the other? Because these are standalone games, even though they're part of the trilogy. And does all of the extra hours that's brought into you by Rebirth actually lead a lot into the playtime? Does it matter? Do you enjoy it? Is it too long of a game? Because there's things that we have to talk about. So, in a sense, when this game starts, you begin the open world. You're just leaving Midgar, essentially how it was from the first part in the initial PlayStation release. So there was a sense from the community that when you bring in the open world, you got to be able to bring in the sheer landscape. You're bringing this on a new console, on the PS5, the quick loading, solid state drive, and all of that. You want to see exactly what it's going to be. Traverse landscape to landscape from Cosmo Canyon, Nebel, Junon, Grasslands, all of that with no loading. Chocobos that are completely different. Ones that go on water, ones that go through mountains, ones that can fly, ones that can glide. It's pretty cool to see all the different landscapes and no loading in the traversal, using buggy, using some of the stuff, not everything on the high wind side, but some of the water things, because we still got a whole nother game to get to, and I'll give you the eventual release date, I think, that may be in toward the end of the video. But there's a lot to see in the open world concept. But also we've had a lot of the games like Assassin's Creed, correct? Where some of that stuff has been done ad nauseum and you're just sick of it. So how is Square Enix going to implement it? Because they don't do a lot of those type of games. But did they capture the grandiose aspect of being able to travel? In a way, I think they did. Because the amount of different lands that you have that are completely different from one to another on the world map, the types of vehicles that you use, the types of chocobo that you use, everything does feel completely different. And when you get a chance to the end game, which I'm not at yet, although I did finish it. You got to be level 70 to do some of that stuff. I finished the game at level 50 at around 120 hours. That means there's going to be maybe like 80 hours plus post-game for you if you want to do all that. So I might do like I did in part 1, take a little bit of a respite and then jump into it. The reason why I'm getting into it so late again, because of all the stuff throughout work, with the Water for Sharks, all the play-by-play, all the stuff that I've been doing, hasn't led me a lot of time. Plus, I'll be honest with you and shoot you straight, even though this game came out on the leap year on the 29th side of it, I waited for a couple patches because I noticed playing from Remake to Rebirth that the graphics and everything else look a little soft, and you'll see some of that outside the cutscenes. And I was wondering, is it my eyes? Am I missing something? It's a little blurry compared to what it used to be. I think the grandiose landscape, Square Enix came out and said we had to take a little bit of cutbacks on certain things because the landscape is so massive. And you can see this now, and between the traversing around, the draw distance is absolutely incredible, and some of this stuff's inspiring, but you are going to take a hit on some of the stuff up close. What's the difference between Remake and Rebirth in the sense of the combat? Not much, but you do get synergy abilities. And that really does feel like if you didn't play part 1 and you go into part 2, that it never really seemed like it should be ever gone. Because if you combine with Tifa, Cloud, Barret, any of the members, Red 13, Yuffie, it's excellent. You can fill up a little bit of the ATB bars that you have on the bottom right that we talked about before, but on the bottom there's a little bit of charges. When it gets to a certain amount of charges, then you can unleash synergy abilities and little counterattacks. If you hold R1, you press X or circle, you can counter return fire depending on everything on the skill tree, and I'll show you there, and the synergy abilities work great. It allows you to get in the tandem and being able to choose your stuff in active time or in real time, as we talked about before from part 1, but then also combine the synergy abilities to pressure enemies, and I think it's a pretty good tandem gameplay combat loop. My only problem, and this is where I would dock this game a couple points. Again, we talked about the traversal and how it seems pretty cool as far as the amount of types of different vehicles and the way that the landscapes and the map and everything else all change. And I talked about Chadley before, in a sense of being able to reset your skill trees. You can still do all that stuff. It's free this time. It's not 100 gil. But there's so many open world objectives that you have to do as far as getting access to radio towers to get part of the maps increased, little intel things you have to do with springs to get traversal as far as the open world. And there's 5 or 6 of those in each one of the world maps that you have, and there's 5 or 6 different times. So if you times that by 5, roughly, you get about 25, 30 times that you have to go ahead and do this. That gets really fucking boring to me. I really don't like that aspect of it. I know some people will kind of use it as the open world concept. You should be getting used to that. I don't like it. I really think that they should have taken that, maybe instead of doing it 5 times, probably about twice on each side of it, because I think what it essentially does, yes, this game's a lot longer, but I think there's probably 25, 30 hours of time where I'm sitting there trying to find other parts in the landscape and doing things that just feel more like busy work, more like these sports games do, and I don't like that aspect of it. That's where I definitely would dock this game a couple points. Yes, the landscapes and everything else, the traverse that you get is really beautiful, but there is a lot of repetitive stuff there with Chadley, and then even when you get into the same things where you have to get more intel to do some fights and this and that, it just gets to be a lot. And some of the fights I think are a little bit unfair, especially when you get into the post-game. Although I will tell you one thing, the one that everybody bitched about, the one with head case, when you go ahead and you do that one for biological intel, you do that in a team of 2 with just Cloud and Tifa, do some of their synergy abilities. It really teaches you how to use the synergy ability thing, so I'll turn that into a positive here for you, so it's not all downtrodden. I didn't like all of the open landscape of it, to be honest, and I was in the minority on this. I talked about it a little bit from part 1. I prefer a little bit more of a linear game, but we needed to see the world map open up essentially like it did in the real game. It did in this one. They did some really good things, but I thought some of the stuff for the traversal was a little bit boring. So that's where I was with it. So talk about some of the things. The graphics took a little bit of a hit as far as we talk about some of the faces, but the open area, the draw distance, and everything else was great. Story decisions. And here is, again, I'm going to have this labeled as a spoiler-free review, but I got to talk about a couple things. So you introduce some characters. Again, Yuffie is not one of those complete characters that are throwaway, that you can completely miss. Unlike Final Fantasy VII, she is going to be a big part of the party, and she also takes the goofball role Kind of like Aerith was having the serious role and all that stuff in part 1. Aerith is more of a goofball in this than ever, and I think that Square Enix probably missed the mark a little bit on that, but Yuffie is incredibly charming. I love the skill set that she has. They've took everything on Final Fantasy VII Intermission. If you didn't play that side story after a remake, please do. It was excellent, but Yuffie is a wonderful character. She might be one of my favorite characters in this entire game. I thought they absolutely nailed it. I love her skill set, everything else. It's incredibly charming, and Gold Saucer Date for Yuffie is very underrated. That one was excellent. I don't want to spoil everything, but just tell you, Yuffie's excellent. You get to the part in Cosmo Canyon with Red, if you know that stuff very well, that story is very heartwarming, but also you have parts where there's too many things that are going on at once that I think maybe take away from the direction of Aerith herself. Because we all know what happens with Aerith, and if you don't know, I'm not going to spoil it, but that is where this game will end, essentially, and that will leave a lot of brevity into Part 3. Part 3 probably releases in 2028. The reason I say that, you had the COVID pandemic in 2020, I had the digital release of Remake, 4 years, essentially was Rebirth, so PS4, PS5, PS6, maybe for Part 3, and then we'll be done. That's kind of the landscape of where I see the thing, but I just don't know if Square Enix did enough with Aerith. I know that she has her moments in the storyline that we all talk about, but I think her personality and some of the other things, she's not as strong of a character that she was in Part 1. And I flat out told you this, and that since the first interview, when we went over the Part 1 game, and I said, look, they made me care more about Aerith than I ever did because I was Team Tifa all the way. And I love that part for Part 1. But in Part 2, I don't feel like I had the emotional aspect that I was supposed to have with Aerith. I'm just going to leave it at that. I do want to mention this for Tifa and Cloud. This is where I absolutely love this game. I absolutely adore this game for this. Again, came out when I was 10 in 1997. We've been essentially waiting, 27 years for this moment to have Cloud and Tifa. Again, it's not much of a love triangle as it probably should be from the initial game. I think you kind of know where I'm going with this. Cloud and Tifa, their storyline, their feelings for one another. Britt Baron as absolutely wonderful as Tifa. All the voice cast. Again, Erica Lindbeck as Jessie from Part 1. You do get some pretty cool parts in there for Part 2 that I won't spoil, but Britt does a phenomenal job as Tifa, and if I could tell you this all honestly, I'm just going to say it now. If I could meet Erica Lindbeck and Britt Baron, I would absolutely give them a hug and beg them to take a picture with me. I don't care what you said. I have the biggest smile on my face. I would love to go meet them because they did an absolutely wonderful job with these characters. The relationship between Cloud and Tifa is one of the best that I've ever seen, and Square Enix did an unbelievable job bringing those characters to life, sharing their feelings in real time, the facial reactions. The music in this game is the best I've ever heard in the sense, and there's so many different tracks. Yes, there's a little bit of audio mixing issues. You have to go into the options and turn down song volume because song volume isn't labeled as cutscene volume because some of the stuff plays too loud. So make sure you turn the vocals up to 10 and probably everything else down to 7 or 6. You'll be good there for a little soft fix. But absolutely incredible work there. The voice acting is 10 out of 10 just as it was, but it's even better now because you get the trials and tribulations between all the characters. But I do have to say this with the utmost respect, and I don't care because I know this is going to be a little bit different for Death Unites Us, but for fans that have waited to see this for 27 years, when you get to the Gold Saucer, please don't skip out on any of the stuff because in this game it's not like Persona where all the relationship stuff is in depth, but there is times when you have to say the right things or do the right things. If you need to use a little bit of a guide, it's pretty quick to look up to what to say to do all that. Try to do it in your first playthrough. If you really want to get the date as Aerith or Tifa, make sure that you do it right. but I'm pleased to report to you that when you get to the Gold Saucer, when you get to the Sky Wheel, when you get to the Loveless Play, that is the best part of the entire game. And if I could ever tell you that there's a best cutscene in the entire game, you'll get a small snippet of it, but I promise it's spoiler free. There is nothing better. This is the best that I've ever seen in a game as far as tearjerker and all of that. And this was coming off of some of the stuff from part 1 when I told you I had to flat out stop the game because I was a mess. It flat out made me cry. That was sad tears. This was actually happy tears, and I'm not ashamed to admit that to you. Some of the best storytelling. It's exactly what we wanted to see for so long. Square Enix, that was a love letter to the fans. Thank you for that. So, here's what I want to say in the overall thoughts as we get set to close here in a couple minutes. Now, when a game goes from 60 to 120, upwards of 200, is that too long? That's for you to decide, but I can definitely tell you that the $70 is of your utmost respect. You get every single penny that you pay for. Yeah, some of the soft graphical differences, I think even I can live with it. I even have to try it for a few times. I got over it because of the sheer landscape of everything else. But there is a point where the game gets too long, and there is a point where there's, as you see, a lot of side content in my walkthrough here for this review, in the sense of when you got to Gold Saucer, you were supposed to have fun with all that stuff, and I still did. There's so many variety of minigames. There's going to be ones that are flat out duds, and there's going to be ones like this one as a Space Ranger that I absolutely love. There's going to be ones that you really enjoy, and Queen's Blood, the card game, is absolutely excellent too. But there's a lot of those. I mean, even when you get to Costa del Sol, it's like minigame madness. And some of the side quest content is a little boring. Some of the map traversal, again, for getting intel is incredibly boring. I think those were times where if you cut down on some of those, if you cut down on some of the stuff with the minigames and the side quests, I think that it would still be okay. I think you could take a 120, 130 hour experience for a full playthrough, get it to 100, and you would be exactly right. Now, we're also at the point where if you get to 130 in part 3, I think that's probably where it is. I'm not spoiling this whole cutscene, but I just want you to watch this here. See the way this sparkles in Tifa's eyes and tell me that isn't one of the coolest things. I gave Remake a 10 out of 10. I give Rebirth, maybe it's tough to say 8, but there's a couple drawbacks. But again, that still averages out to a 9 between the two games. Please don't miss this one. It's incredible.